to the February 8th, 2022 regular meeting of the Pinehurst Village Council. For those of you that may be watching on live stream, as those in the hall can see, we have the full Village Council here tonight, as always, and several members of staff, also a number of the public to observe tonight's meeting, and I welcome you all here. If you are watching this meeting on live stream and you wish to make a comment to the Village Council on any of our pieces of business or other areas of interest and concern that you have, and you're watching by live stream, you may send those comments to us by an email message to the address publiccomments@vopnc.org. It's public comments, one word, two C's, at vopnc.org. Those comments will be received by the village clerk, and they'll be circulated later to all council members and appropriate staff where necessary. So we welcome you all to this meeting. Having called the meeting to order, our first order of business will be reports from members of the council and the village manager. And I'll call first on Jeff Sanborn, our village manager. Jeff?
Thanks, John. I'd just like to comment on a couple of things. The first is, I think many people are already aware, we've had literally dozens and dozens of our citizens and residents who have had their identities stolen over the last few weeks in connection with a fraud that's been perpetrated against TD Bank. I'm not real familiar with TD Bank, but all the activity seems to be centered there, or at least most of it. What's going on here is, and this has happened before, TD Bank apparently offered incentives for people to open up new accounts, and some enterprising evildoers out there got a hold of a bunch of identities. It's not clear yet where those identities came from, and they fraudulently opened probably hundreds and thousands of these new accounts, waited for that incentive to be deposited in the account, and then withdrew all the funds out of the account and took the money and ran. And all of this just happens to, be able to transpire before the owners of those identities get notified in the mail that they had an account that was opened up in their name. The FBI fraud folks are working on this. It's not clear that they have any real leads yet. I think we've been told that most of the activity ran through servers in New Mexico and Texas and maybe other states. I can tell you that Glenn Webb, our police chief, is currently at a statewide conference, and he's from talking to colleagues out there. This is certainly nothing that's isolated to the village of Pinehurst or Southern Moore County. It's all across the state and probably wider than that as well. I'm sure it's little consolation to the folks who have had their identities stolen out there, because, somebody's successfully used your identity to perpetrate a fraud, and you might be concerned about, what's the next shoe that's going to drop now that your identity is out there. But in reality, in this case, the real target was TD Bank, and I'm sure that it's likely that they've lost pretty substantial sums of money as a result of this activity. So I guess maybe from the standpoint of us folks in Pinehurst, it's just a good opportunity to exercise maybe a little bit more care and caution. I know that when I open up my mailbox and pull the stuff out of there, hardly a day goes by where we don't get some sort of unsolicited mail from some bank or financial institution, and we've kind of been conditioned to just look at it and just assume these folks are trying to sell us on a new credit card or something like that, and it goes right in the trash without even looking at it. You might want to take if you're like us, you're like me, you might want to take a closer look at that stuff here in the near future to make sure somebody hasn't done something like this with your identity as well. The second thing I'd like to comment on is all of the yard debris that's still out there in the village as a result of the storms that we've had to endure over the last several weeks. We typically get around to picking that stuff up in a much more efficient and quick fashion. Unfortunately, in this case, the amounts, the sheer volume of the debris was a little bit greater than expected, especially from that first storm. And overlaid on that, we've had to deal with some pretty significant staff outages as a result of COVID. And we've had a couple of subsequent storms that we've been working through as well with, with storm preparation and cleanup. So I just want to thank everybody for your patience. We will get out there and get it all cleaned up, but it's taken a little bit longer than expected. Thanks.
Jeff, thank you very much. From my reports, I have two, as Jeff did. First thing I would like to acknowledge is the fact that for a couple of years, I've begun these meetings by warning everybody and reminding everybody of the problems we've had through the COVID pandemic. And of course, we've had a lot of virtual meetings during that time too, as we did very recently. But tonight we're here. Obviously, medical conditions continue to improve. However, in talking to the health officials here in the county, we all need to continue to be safe and safe practices where we are. So if you need to spread out in this room, there's plenty of space for that. And I just remind you all to be cautious, and hopefully things will continue to improve. The other report I'll make tonight is the fact that this morning, Councilmember Pizzella and I attended the regular meeting of the Pinehurst Partners in Progress group, and Moore County Partners in Progress, and it was quite a lengthy presentation. And I would just draw attention to one announcement which was confirmed tonight or this morning rather, and had been mentioned a while ago, and that is that Partners in Progress is, of course, a county organization. We tend to think of only the county of Moore being down here in the south end, but their real work, or a lot of their real work, is aimed at helping other parts of the county where economic development is very important. And very recently, as some of you may know, Partners in Progress was helpful in gaining a grant, a building reuse grant, for a company called Mean-Haas Furniture up in Robbins. And this grant will assist them in refurbishing a building and creating a business there in the furniture business. Probably 60 jobs will be brought to that facility when that is fully operational over the near term. And that's a very significant piece of progress for Robbins by Partners in Progress here in Moore County. So I was very encouraged by that they are directing their attention to the whole of Moore County in many areas that need economic development in different ways than we may need here in the south part of the county. So I think Pat and I gained a lot from not only that knowledge this morning, but other things on their agenda which they're doing, and we'll continue to report to you on the Partners in Progress group as they expand and do their business in the coming months. With that, concludes my reports for the night. I'll start on my left to your right and go around the council to see what other reports from our major committees and commissions are present tonight. Lydia, do you have anything this evening?
I don't, John. Thank you.
Patrick?
Nothing at all. Thank you.
Jane?
At the end of January, the council participated in 3 days of School of Government training on the essentials of municipal governance. And it was very engaging and exhausting to go through it. But one thing that was very, very clear, the things that they were trying to teach all these council members from across the state, how to do fiscal planning and how to plan for the capital projects and so forth. And it was abundantly clear that the village of Pinehurst is doing a tremendous job because it was all familiar. And that is down to our staff, and it's down to our village manager. And I'd just like to thank our village manager for his leadership over the years, and our staff.
Thank you, Jane. Jeff?
I'll add ditto to that and go specifically on the COVID issues. I know that in the area, especially in the medical community, we've had a lot of trouble maintaining services because we've lost staff to be able to do that, and the village has done the same thing. The village has lost a lot of staff during the COVID process and not able to keep the 100% of the services going, but they reacted, they responded, they were flexible, and they prioritized what needed to happen and got us through it. So I think it's a good job, and thank you for all you've done during this tiring times. I do have a report that I attended on January 26th, the Triangle J Council of Governments delegate meeting. I'm the delegate for the Pinehurst Village on there. Effectively, this group is one that gets together with different government delegates from across the area and see if there's ways we can support each other, ways and things that we're doing together that are similar, and we share ideas. And had a chance to share ideas with those various folks and represented Pinehurst and talking about that and had a flow of ideas. No specific tangible things or actions we have to do at this point in time, but the meeting went well. That's all I've got.
Glad you're a delegate there, Jeff. Thanks very much. Moving on from council reports, then we'll look at the third item on our agenda tonight, which is a motion to approve the consent agenda. These are items that have been previously reviewed and will be approved all in one motion. However, I'll ask council members, is there anything in the consent agenda items that there's a question from a council member about or wishes to be pulled out for further discussion? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move to approve all the items listed and considered routine on the consent agenda.
That's a motion by Jane Hogeman. Is there a second?
Second.
A second by Jeff Morgan. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Seeing none, the consent agenda is approved. We'll move on now into items number actually 4 and 5. This is a particularly interesting and pleasurable time for members of the council and staff. We have the opportunity tonight to thank 2 individuals who served previously on the council, and we want to recognize their service this evening by awarding them resolutions that the council has designed and approved to thank them for their service to the village of Pinehurst. We have 2 of these tonight, one for Judy Davis, the other for Kevin Drum. I'm going to read the resolution to Judy Davis momentarily. Kevin has asked that Councilmember Bosch read his resolution, and we'll do that as well. But Judy Davis, would you join me at this microphone up front? Thank you. Good evening, Judy. I want to make sure the microphone works very well. I hope we're picking up the voice because we want to make sure this is heard on the live stream as well. I think that's going to be pretty good. Judy, it's good to see you here. If you just step this way a little bit. I want to read this on behalf of the Village Council, your colleagues, past, present, and maybe in the future, and thank you for your service. This is a resolution honoring the service of Miss Judy Davis. That whereas the Village Council of Pinehurst, North Carolina, wishes to acknowledge and express its appreciation to Miss Judy Davis for her dedicated service to the citizens of Pinehurst as Mayor Pro Tem, Treasurer, and Council Member. And whereas Ms. Davis has served the Village of Pinehurst as Mayor Pro Tem from December 2019 to November 2021, as Treasurer from November 2017 to December 2019, and as a Council Member in total from November 2017 to December 2021. And whereas, as Mayor Pro Tem, Treasurer, and Council Member, she has devoted her time, energy, and talents to the village and provided experience and sound judgment on its behalf with unfailing integrity, dignity, and thoughtful reflection. And whereas, as Mayor Pro Tem, Treasurer, and Council Member, she has reviewed and deliberated on all matters, facts, and proposals presented before this council, and at all times kept the public's interest as the first priority. And whereas Ms. Davis actively participated in the library working group that recommended the library needs assessment and facilitated the asset and service transfer agreement, and whereas Ms. Davis was a key negotiator for the council in the development of its incentive agreement with the USGA's Golf House Pinehurst facility and related Pinehurst Resort Hotel. And whereas Ms. Davis actively participated in the development of the 2019 Comprehensive Plan, the Cannon Park Community Center, and the West Pinehurst Park Master Plan. And whereas Ms. Davis contributed to the development of the Village Place and Pinehurst South Small Area Plans. And whereas Ms. Davis was and continues to be a strong supporter for promoting the Village of Pinehurst brand to ensure it remains an attractive residential community. Now therefore be it resolved by the Village of Council of Pinehurst, North Carolina, in a regular meeting assembled this 11th day of January, 2022, as follows. Section 1, that the Village Council hereby expresses on behalf of its citizens of Pinehurst deep appreciation and gratitude for the gifts of time, ability, and commitment in carrying out the duties of Mayor Pro Tem, Treasurer, and Council Member for the Village of Pinehurst. And Section 2, a copy of this resolution be spread upon the permanent minutes of the Village of Pinehurst, and a copy thereof, duly executed by the Mayor and Village Clerk, be presented to Ms. Davis as a token of our gratitude. Judy, thank you.
Sure, thank you. One of the things I was thinking about today, if you just even look back at the 4 years that I served, the activities, the initiatives that we undertook were nothing like I think I thought we were going to deal with when I was elected along with Kevin. But if you go back to 1999, when I was driving down here after a hurricane, going to my first session of Golfari at Pine Needles, I certainly never thought to the future that I'd be standing here in front of you. And do I love Pinehurst? Absolutely. Just a special place to live, such a welcoming community, and an honor and a privilege to serve each and every citizen in this community, and to get to work with this incredible staff, to get to know them better, to know Brooke Hunter, to understand that the point that Jane was making, that we're probably one of the few communities that has a 5-year plan for a financial outlook. You know, that's how business does it. I mean, what a gratifying thing to know that we're running this like an important business for our community. And get to work with Alex Cameron and Darren later, Jeff Batten, and just a tremendous staff here. So Jeff, thank you for being at the home for all of us, and to have colleagues like Jane and John and Lydia and Kevin, and now new colleagues that I won't get to work with, but hopefully our paths will cross. And again, thank you to all the citizens for the honor and privilege of serving you, and thank you for making this such a great and wonderful place. Thank you.
Lydia, Kevin?
Hi, Kevin. I'm delighted to be able to present this to you on behalf of Village Council and the residents of the Village of Pinehurst. So I will read it the best I can. A resolution honoring the service of Mr. Kevin Drum. That whereas the Village Council of Pinehurst, North Carolina wishes to acknowledge and express its appreciation to Mr. Kevin Drum for his dedicated service to the citizens of Pinehurst as a council member, and whereas Mr. Drum has served the Village of Pinehurst as a council member from November 2017 to November 2021, and whereas as a council member he has devoted his time, energy, and talents to the village and provided experience and sound judgment on its behalf with firmness, passion, and thoughtful reflection, and whereas as a council member he has reviewed and deliberated on all matters, facts, and proposals presented before the council, and at all times kept the public's interest as his first priority, and whereas Mr. Drum was a member of the library working group that recommended the library needs assessment, which facilitated the asset and service transfer agreement, and whereas Mr. Drum was instrumental in the negotiations for the USGA's Golf House Pinehurst facility and related Pinehurst Resort Hotel, and whereas Mr. Drum actively participated in the development of the 2019 Comprehensive Plan, the Cannon Park Community Center, and the West Pinehurst Park Master Plan, and whereas Mr. Drum contributed to the development of the Village Place and Pinehurst South small area plans, and whereas Mr. Drum was and continues to be a strong supporter for promoting the Village of Pinehurst brand to ensure it remains an attractive residential community. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Village Council of Pinehurst, North Carolina, in a regular meeting assembled this 11th day of January 2011, I think today's February. We've had some Zoom meetings. Now therefore be it resolved by the Village Council of Pinehurst, North Carolina, in a regular meeting assembled this, no, I've read that one. So, be resolved as follows. Section 1, that the Village Council hereby expresses on behalf of the citizens of Pinehurst deep appreciation and gratitude for the gifts of time, ability, and commitment in carrying out the duties of a council member for the Village of Pinehurst. Section 2, that a copy of this resolution be spread upon the permanent minutes of the Village of Pinehurst, and a copy thereof, duly executed by the mayor and village clerk, be presented to Mr. Kevin Drum as a token of our gratitude. This resolution passed and adopted this 11th day of January, 2022. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you very much. You know, it's been an honor to serve these 4 years. You know, you hear about all the things we did. Moore County Transportation Plan wasn't on there, but I'm really proud that we passed the first transportation plan in Moore County history. The comprehensive plan, I'm really proud of that. I think my dad's looking down right now. I'm really proud that we got the USGA here. We're the home of golf. Also, we work really hard, this group, 4 years I served, towards a digital city for transparency. And all of a sudden, COVID hit, and we had to pull the trigger, and I'm really proud of that. But I want to thank the citizens for a front row seat to work with the best staff in North Carolina. Basically, the staff did all this. And I was there at the front row to support them, maybe guide them. But I just think the unsung heroes here are the people in that building working every day that are accomplishing these fantastic goals. And I want to dedicate this to the staff. And I also think that we worked really hard in our 4-year term on transparency. And I want everyone to know that we worked hard so you can see video of these meetings and everything that's transparent. I'm going to extend that to that end. I've just started an organization, North Carolina Citizens for Transparent Government. And it's going to be a big part of my life to ensure transparency happens in all governments. So I want to thank you for this opportunity, which is leading to this second chapter for me. And once again, I'd love the applause to go to the staff.
Thank you, Kevin. Moving on with our agenda then to item number 6. This would be a motion to recess our regular meeting and enter into a public hearing. Is there a motion?
I move to recess the regular meeting and enter public hearing 1, development moratorium extension.
That's a motion by Lydia Bosch. Is there a second?
Second.
A second by Councilmember Pizzella. All in favor say aye. Aye. Are any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. We'll be in our special hearing, public hearing number 1 of the day. Jeff?
Thanks, John. And this is subject to proposed extension of the moratorium that we currently have in place for the Village Place Rattlesnake Trail area and the Pinehurst South area. As we continue to work through the small area plans and then implementation of the small area plans so that we can make sure that subsequent development is in accordance with both those plans and our comprehensive plan. You all had the opportunity to work on this a little bit at the last meeting, and I think we're at the right point now where we have this this public hearing scheduled so that our members of the public have the opportunity to participate in this process.
Thank you, Jeff. We'll call on Darren to give the additional details of the background. And can I ask the clerk, were there any people who signed up to speak at the public hearing? Thank you. Darren, please proceed.
And I just wanted to add that I didn't think we'd be here 4 months or 90 days after the last time we passed the moratorium extension. I had optimistically thought that we'd be further along in the process. We are not. I think we are headed towards the end of the process, but we have not yet, as you know, and we'll have this discussion tonight, finished up on the small area plans or any corresponding code updates related to that. So this extension would extend that moratorium another 120 days to allow for the completion of those plans and said potential updates to the PDO.
Thank you, Darren. And as a reminder to the public, but for the council, we discussed this at our last meeting, the need to make this extension, and felt that extending it 120 days was the appropriate time for that. So it was something we discussed at the last meeting, and now we have the hearing tonight to take comments on that. I will call for public comments, and then any comments from the council members that wish to be made can be made after that or in our regular meeting when we go back in to vote. I have two persons signed up to speak on public hearing number 1, which is this subject of the moratorium extension. Debbie Layler.
Debbie Layler, 80 Azalea Road. I just was wondering if Mr. Bjork could clarify exactly what the process will be over the next 120 days following whenever the plan may be adopted. What is the process then by which changes get adopted into the zoning code and into the PDO? I'm very concerned that there will be a window of opportunity between the adoption of the plan and changes to the zoning ordinance, during which time developers could slide proposals in and get themselves on the books somehow. So 4 months sounds like a lot of time, certainly enough time, but I was wondering if you could just clarify.
4 months does seem like a lot of time, but 4 months goes by relatively rapidly around here. We are hoping, I mean, it's going to be it's kind of TBD, to be determined yet. I mean, we still have to get through, and we have to come together and look at the small area plans and say, this is what we need to do moving forward. If we can come together as a consensus and say the concepts that are laid out in these plans are acceptable, then what we would do is we would follow up with some of those PDO updates in order to preserve any of those development patterns that are shown in the small area plans. That will take some time. I mean, we've been already working, crafting, and looking at some of the zoning and PDO updates that we need to do that. But until we get a little bit further and to the end with the small area plan process itself, it's hard for us to jump to step 2. Once we get into that step 2, then we can move relatively quickly if we're, again, on agreement with what's in the small area plans. And that will take public hearings at the Planning and Zoning Board and public hearings here at the Village Council.
Darren, just maybe to help answer that question, is it fair to say that in terms of kind of major big chunks of things that need to get done, there's a point where we can adopt the small area plans first. Then there's work on a zoning
Correct.
map update, right?
Zoning map update.
Then there's incorporation of the form-based code into an ordinance that can also be adopted, which will amend our PDO. And then there's probably a whole list of other smaller PDO text amendments that would be associated with implementing these plans. Is that
Correct. The basic premise with anything we do with respect to the form-based code, the idea is we would adopt that as an overlay to the existing zoning. So what we have to do is that when we adopt an overlay, it doesn't change the underlying zoning. So there might be portions where we have to do some map amendments to change something from residential to non-residential or vice versa.
Yeah. Thank you.
And maybe an additional underscoring reply to that question is that some of the way forward will be discussed later tonight in our work session when we're talking about this idea and the moratorium and what we're going to do with the small area plan. So some of it is to yet be determined. All right, I have a second speaker for this public hearing, Jack Farrell.
Thank you very much. Jack Farrell, 21 Gray Abbey. This is the most ambitious, optimistic staff, and I love working with them. I believe it's still a little bit optimistic. I I think you'll hear a lot later on about the plan itself, that document that we saw described the other night. But really now the real work becomes, in fact, I wouldn't even spend a lot of time on that document, to tell you the truth. I think it's interesting. It'll be a nice piece of shelfware when we're done, but that's probably its only use. The real work is in developing the form-based codes and the changes to the PDO necessary and/or zoning requirements and so forth. And so that's the real work. And so I've been trying to learn as much as I could over the last few months about form-based codes, and it's a very complex subject, but at the same time, I think it applies definitely to us. But I'm struck by how very much it looks like the effort we put into over a 2-year period in developing the new HPC guidelines a few years back. It took us over 2 years to do that. It had a lot of the characteristics of form-based coding, visual representation of what you want it to look like and so forth, and it took a lot of work to get there. So it's not unlike that effort, but I just want to remind you that took over 2 years to get from where we started to end the job. So it was not trivial. I think maybe a 9-month effort would be a little more realistic as far as this effort goes, to tell you the truth. I hope we can do it in 20 days, but I'm not as optimistic as staff is. I'm willing to work hard on it, but I'm not optimistic. And more importantly, we need to get the process right going forward. I am quite concerned that the process in the past has given less attention to the citizens and their requirements than it should, to tell you the truth. And so going forward in the process over the next 120 days, 9 months, 2 years, however long it takes, I think we need to make sure that we're including the citizens appropriately in that process. There's one thing I learned. I was a consultant for a number of years, and there's one thing I learned. The best consulting engagement I had from a client perspective and from the firm's perspective was when we constantly dealt with, on an ongoing basis, the clients. Did adjustments, did course corrections, corrected any assumptions that may have been wrong, and understood what we were talking about. And I like to see that from when we deal particularly when we deal with consultants, that we spend a little more time with the real clients, the clients being the citizens of Pinehurst to a great extent. So I think we have an opportunity to do something really well here. I'm a believer in this form-based codes. I've been studying a number of cities that have implemented them, Beaufort, South Carolina, and Asheville and others, and I think that it can work here. And particularly, we have a great opportunity to do it, but let's do it right over the next 120 days or 9 months or 2 years, however long it takes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farrell. Are there other members of the public who may not have signed up but wish to speak in this public hearing? And reminder, the public hearing is about whether or not to adopt the moratorium on building in the small area plans for the next 120 days, the extension of the moratorium that exists. So that's what the hearing's about. I see a hand in the back. Would you like to step forward, sir?
Webster, 140 West Mackenzie. I just want to add to what's already been said that I think the basis for the small area plans is something that the population of this village do not agree with. And therefore, I think before we can start agreeing on how long it'll take to implement it, I think we first have to get agreed what it is that this plan should be about. And therefore, I think that 9 months or certainly 4 months is insufficient. I mean, I would be thinking, let's agree that this is going to take a long time and that, we should put on a year on it at least. And then if we can do it in less time than that, well, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments about extending the moratorium on the small area plans? Seeing none. Yes, sir. Your name and address, please.
Sure, John. I'm Steve Say, now at 5 McDonald Road East. And I'm, as I think all of you know, I'm a fairly major stakeholder. I'm all for it. But understand that there are property owners and owners' rights. So when you talk about another year or 3 months, there are effects. And I think you all know, hopefully, you're pretty fortunate to have a good steward here of the property that I own. But, let's not take this forever, right? So there are adverse effects, right? There are property rights in this world, the last I checked. So let's be reasonable. And, let's find the right solutions going forward. But, let's come up with a plan and let's implement it. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments from the public on the extension of this moratorium? Seeing none, is there a motion to close the public hearing and move then to our regular meeting, at which point we'll discuss and take a vote on this extension? May I have a motion?
I move to adjourn public hearing 1, development moratorium extension, and re-enter the regular meeting.
That's a motion by Lydia Bosch. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Councilmember Pizzella. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, the motion carries. We're back in the regular meeting, and the council will now discuss and ask any questions they have about this extension. Are there questions from the council to staff members or discussion among ourselves on this extension?
I have a question. Darren has assured us that 120 days is enough. We're hearing from public comment that 120 days is enough. We're hearing from the public that 120 days might not be enough. And from Mr. Say, we're hearing about property rights. At what point do we need to balance property rights and the need to get the small area plans in place? At some point, property rights have to be considered, and I'm all for the 120-day extension. But at some point, I feel like we have to consider property rights, and that's going to be a balancing act. And I'm not sure if you're ready to answer that question, but as I listen to a public comment and I realize we've got this balance here, how do we balance it? And maybe that's an answer for council.
I mean, the response that I have on 120 days was I do like to keep some of the pressure on myself and the department to keep moving the ball forward. And we view the shorter chunks of 120 days or 90 days, if we have to come back here and explain where we are in the format of a public hearing, we think that, we have a notice public hearing where the public property owners can show up, and at least they can voice their opinion, they can voice their concerns, and we can tell you where we are in the process. I don't know if 120 days is going to be enough, frankly. I don't know. I mean, we still have to get through, I still think we do have to get a general consensus on where we are with these small area plans, because from the small area plans comes the actual zoning that we have to follow up with. I don't know, but, we can, 120 days, we can always come back a month out of that and add it again, come through the same process.
And maybe there's not an answer to my question tonight. Maybe the fact that I'm vocalizing this concern only indicates that that concern will only be greater as we go forward. Because I completely agree. You do the comp plan, you do the small area plans, you owe it to the community with the money we've spent on doing these plans to get it right. So you need the moratorium to get it right. But you can't drag it on forever. So the balance is going to be a bigger part of my thinking as we go forward.
And the easiest thing for us as staff, Alex and I, if you put it a year and a half, 2 years, boy, that would buy us some time. It would take some stress off us, I can tell you that. But, we have the same concerns about property rights, about not locking things down permanently. So that's why the 120 days, if you want to, 6 months, if 6 months is acceptable, I think we can get a lot done. We can get more done in 6 months. 120 days just keeps us trying to move this thing forward.
Another thing too, let's say 30 days out or 45 days out, you realize you just can't get it done in 120 days. I would rather hear that sooner rather than later.
I think too, though, Lydia, as we set up this moratorium and have extended it before, we're operating completely within state regulations on this. We're acting correctly to establish the moratoriums, to extend the moratoriums, and certainly there's a view, and the regulations call for that in maintaining property rights here, but we're operating under regulations. We're not breaking any laws on that, and we're trying to follow the exact procedures we need to have.
As long as we keep moving forward with solving what's laid out in the resolution for why we created the moratorium.
Right.
And that's what we are doing. We are actively doing that. You had the open house last week. Now we're going to move into some other phases. I hope that we can take to the Planning and Zoning Board and really vet through this, but we are continuing to move this thing forward.
Right. And that's the key, I think. It's moving forward, showing progress towards the end goal. But points well taken on where we're headed. All right. Are there any other questions from council members on this discussion point for the adoption of Ordinance 2201? Seeing none, is there a motion then to adopt Ordinance 22-1, the motion on the ninth agenda item?
I'll move to approve Ordinance 2201, extending a moratorium on real estate development, small plan focus areas, attached as Exhibit D, imposed by Ordinance 2103 on February 10, 2021, extended by Ordinance 2115 on October 26, 2021, for an additional 120-day period from the date of expiration, thus to expire on June 8, 2022.
That's a motion by Jane Hogaman. Is there a second?
Second.
That's a second by Councilmember Pizzella. All members in favor of this motion, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. The moratorium will be in effect till June the 8th, 2022. Moving on then to item number 10 on our agenda tonight. It's a presentation of financial statements for the quarter ended December 31st. Jeff, shall we call on Brooke?
I think that says it all. Brooks on her way.
Okay. Brooke, thank you for being with us tonight. I see you've come well prepared, and certainly we've been well prepared by your existing staff memorandum on this. It's good to see you tonight, and thank you very much for giving us the update. Please proceed.
Thank you. Perfect. We will make our way through the financial statements.
Brooke, I think if you could draw the microphone back a little bit or bring it up to you closer. Thank you.
Sure. Today we'll be reviewing the financial statements as of December 31st, 2021. This is the mid-year review of the financial statements. However, I will be presenting the mid-year estimate and mid-year budget amendment at your next meeting as well. So that this is kind of the preliminary discussion before I present that information to you. At the end of this discussion, I will also cover a few slides on fund balance, and that was per your request as a result of some retreat discussion. So we'll cover that as well. The mid-year is the basis for our budget process. And so these are the numbers that are used as a tool for developing our departmental budget requests. All of the departments have received their financial forms and their strategic planning forms, and we are busy developing the budget requests for fiscal year 2023. And those forms are due later this month. The village remains in a good financial position through the first half of the fiscal year. Our general fund is showing net income of $7.2 million in income for the first 6 months of the year. That is higher than the $5.6 million in income the previous year at this point. I would like to note, though, we do have over $4.2 million in encumbrances as of December 31st, and that basically means the funds were committed for a particular purpose. So a purchase order has been issued for particular purchases, or contract was signed, things of that nature. But the funds were just not paid as of December 31st. So we do have some significant purchases and projects that were on order and scheduled. Fund balance in the general fund is currently 83% of budgeted expenditures. That is greater than the 74% level seen the previous year at this point. We have received most of our property tax revenue for the year, as you all are aware. So this percentage will decline as the year progresses. This is the highest point in the year, if you will, and we'll continue to spend that revenue on our scheduled expenditures. The American Rescue Plan Act Special Revenue Fund is being used to track the village's federal allocation in accordance with U.S. Treasury guidelines. The first half of our allocation was received in the first quarter, and that equates to right at $2.6 million. Our cash and investment balances increased by $6.4 million compared with the previous year, and that's primarily due to the receipt of those American Rescue Plan Act funds. That is included in the total cash and investment portfolio. Another reason for this is revenues that are higher than expected and expenditures that are lower expected at this point in the fiscal year. So of our $21 million in cash at December 31st, $20.9 million was invested in the North Carolina Capital Management Trust government portfolio, and I was in attendance of the North Carolina Local Government Investment Association conference this week, and we did learn from the trust that there are plans to reopen the term portfolio that was closed in December of 2020, I believe it was. That was after COVID hit and interest rates dropped to near zero. So they do have plans to potentially reopen that portfolio, which was good news to hear. From revenues and expenditure standpoint, property tax revenues were $681,000 or 6.5% above our quarterly revenue estimates. And part of this is just based on the timing of when residents make those payments right around the January due date. So it just depends on when those come in. The real and personal property tax collection rate of 93.8% is only 0.2% higher than last year, so basically the same collection rate at the same time last year. Our real and personal base grew by 1.6%, and motor vehicle tax base grew by 2.8%, and that is very comparable to our budgeted increases of 1.5% and 1% respectively. So we're on target for that. Local option sales tax revenues, our original adopted budget forecast a 3% increase over the previous year, and so far we've had 4 months of actual collections, and just a reminder that there is a lag in when the tax revenues are actually collected and when we actually receive it. There's a 3-month lag there. So the first 4 months are running 15% ahead of previous year collections, which equates to about $213,000 over our budget for those months. And so I will be recommending an adjustment to this revenue source in the mid-year budget amendment that you will see later. Part of this increase in the higher percentage we're seeing is related to the online sales tax collections that have just been greater than originally projected. But there are a couple of other reasons as well, or that we would suspect. There was a shift from spending on services before the COVID pandemic, and the switch was from services over to taxable goods. And so we are collecting more sales tax on those goods as a result of the change in purchasing patterns. Another item to consider too are the stimulus funding that's into the economy as well. So some of those reasons for this increase in sales tax may be temporary. I just want to mention that. General fund operating expenditures were $1.9 million below our quarterly budget. Differences of this nature are very typical at this point in the year, though. There are a few identifiable causes, one of those being salaries and benefits. That's just due to position vacancies that have taken a little longer to fill. Also, when we were developing the 2022 budget, we anticipated assuming responsibility for the library and archives in October, but after further discussion, that date has been moved to April 15th. So operating expenditures will begin about 6 months later than we originally anticipated in that budget. And lastly, professional services expenditures are below quarterly budget, and that's just due to the timing of our stormwater master plan, as well as the PDO rewrite project. 31% of our capital outlay budgeted for the first 2 quarters was expended, and the largest portion of that variance is due to a fire engine for $625,000, and a solid waste truck for around $220,000 that were both ordered but were not received as of December 31st. We also have a couple other projects like our Village Hall office expansion. You know, that's underway. We've heard the sounds of that. Just was not complete as of December 31st. And several other projects that are in the works but just not complete. And we do anticipate staff finishing most of those projects by the end of the fiscal year. From a financial outlook standpoint, we issued 44 single-family residential building permits as of December 31st, and that's compared to 71 at the same time last year. At this point, we're not anticipating reaching the originally forecasted 150 homes. We would revise that to around 100 to 125, be more likely. Also, from an economic outlook perspective, we are continuing to monitor inflation and interest rates. As we enter our budget preparations for fiscal year 23, Federal Reserve is expected to begin increasing interest rates as early as March at their next meeting, and most economists project multiple interest rate increases during calendar year 2022. So from an investment standpoint, that is positive news to hear. Related to Fair Barn and Harness Track, our Fair Barn covered 92% of operating expenditures with operating revenues. And this is significantly greater than the 12% seen last year at the same time, which obviously was a direct correlation to COVID-related facility closures. We've had very few event postponements now as a result of the pandemic or reschedulings, and actual events are now reaching pre-pandemic levels. And so we are in line with our balanced scorecard target of 95%. Harness Track covered only 56% of operating expenditures, and that's compared to 61% the previous year. Revenues were a little higher, but expenditures were also a little higher. We're talking small numbers. But these results are currently above the annual balanced scorecard target of 45%. But again, keep in mind the actual percentage will decrease as the year progresses. We've received most of our revenues from those seasonal stall rentals. We will have a few other small revenue sources coming in, but we'll have continued operating expenditures for the facility. In conclusion, the Village Council and Village Managers should be commended for exceeding most of the village's financial targets. Fortunately, the impacts of the pandemic have on our revenues and expenditures have been less severe than originally anticipated. So we will begin developing our budget for fiscal year 2023. At this time, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Otherwise, I can move into our few slides that we have related to fund balance.
Other questions from council?
Yes.
Pat, please.
Yeah. American Rescue Plan, Brooke, the $2.6 million for the first half, where was that used at all?
We haven't used it at all yet.
So we're sitting on 2.6, and what are we expecting in the second half?
Another approximately 2.6.
So we're going to have 5.2, which we have not yet made any determination. Obviously, the council will need to make some assessments as to where best to deploy those funds.
Exactly. We have created an American Rescue Plan Act special revenue fund to house those funds until a decision is made, and then a budget amendment will be needed to expend those funds.
Are they 1 or 2 or 3 year money, or are they no year money?
We have until December 31st of 2024 to encumber those funds.
And what does encumbered mean in our world?
Enter into a contract. Contract
You
signed.
need to obligate the funds.
Obligate the funds, exactly.
Brooke, though, is it entering into a contract for work to be done, or is it allocating them in the fund balance as a specific capital expenditure?
Entering into a contract.
You have to have a plan for construction of something and a contract executed by the end of 2024.
That's correct.
Okay.
And then
it's
funds
spend
have,
thereafter.
Exactly.
And
Funds have to be
another-
spent 2 years later. So
Yeah.
you have 2 years from that December 31st of 2026 to actually spend the money.
Pat, go ahead.
Yeah, revenues higher than expected. You used that phrase a few times. Why is that? And is it anything related to the modeling we're doing, or is it, what's the answer?
Yeah, part of that is the sales tax piece. That's probably the highest area that we're seeing higher revenue than we originally anticipated. As I mentioned, those online sales tax collections are just proving to be a lot higher than we originally anticipated, and that I believe the league and other professionals that we use whenever we complete our revenue projections for the upcoming year. It's just coming in higher than we expected. Plus, I think compounding with the stimulus money that was available in the economy and spending of those funds. That's part of the main reason, I would say. That's probably our highest revenue source that's coming in above.
I was glad to hear about the 44 single-family permits that were issued, so progress goes forward in building homes
Tax
for
base,
fam-
exactly.
families that want to move to Pinehurst. Thank
Right.
you.
Absolutely.
Harness track revenue's down. When was the last time the harness track broke even?
Ever?
Never, to my knowledge.
Never.
Rarely.
Okay, so we're right on target. And on the issue of the Fair Barn, did they last produce a profit or a net gain?
That would have been relatively recent. I could go back to get the exact number, but
They're carrying their weight.
they typically cover most of their operating expenditures.
I know we're going to be hearing from Parks and Recreation eventually on a master plan or something, and perhaps then we can really drill down on the harness track.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but when we do the analysis for the Fair Barn, we discount we give them credit for the times when the council chooses to allow entities to use the Fair Barn for free. We don't count that against the Fair Barn staff for that performance measure.
We show it both ways. You are correct, Jeff. So on page 17 of your financial statements, you can see that calculation run both ways. To Jeff's point, the items that we consider discounts for those nonprofits and things like that we offer, those are included. So actually, if you consider those, which amounted to almost $30,000 for the first 2 quarters, they would have covered 114% of that. And so removing those discounts and just looking at true revenue coming in and true operating expenditures, they covered 92%. Thank you for mentioning that.
Just one more question related to the single-family permits. What, and if you don't know the answer, someone else can find it out. What is the revenue we receive for each permit? And how do we determine that fee? Again, if you don't know it, we can find out later, but I'd like to, somebody know it?
I don't know off the top of my head, but it is, the fees are established in the fees and charges schedule.
Okay, they're
That's
in
how
the
that's
schedule.
determined. But I don't know, for example, it's not sure how much it would be for an average one.
State allows us to collect fees that are commensurate with the cost of providing the service. And most recently, we updated our fees and charges schedule 2 years ago, Darren? Was it 2 years ago? Based on a study of what costs are actually incurred, staff, materials, and otherwise, associated with our various planning-related permitting activity.
And on that, there's a set plan review fee for each single-family dwelling. Then on top of that, so we have the plan review fee, which is more like the zoning fee, that zoning review fee, and then there's the inspection fee. The inspection fee is going to vary based on the square footage of the home.
Thank you.
I note that our next agenda item will be adoption of some fees and things that we talked about at last meetings. We can look it up then, Pat. We can calculate it on the spot here. probably.
Thank you, Brooke.
Thank you.
Brooke, I would just say that in my experience, the sort of leads and lags, revenues and expenditures are more extreme at this point than I recall in the past, but it's for reasons well understood, I think, and it'll all come together in a good way, and we'll hear a bit more about that next time.
That's right. Exactly.
And Jeff, maybe for Brooke or perhaps for Mark, on the harness track and the question that Pat was asking, which is probably in all our minds, I'd be interested to know what the usage of the barns is this year, the current season that we're in. I don't know if we know that now, but we can talk about it next meeting.
Jeff, do you have any insights on where we sit right now? Yeah.
Do not, yeah. It should be a pretty strong year, but we'll talk about that next meeting maybe. All right.
Get that for you.
Brooke, I think then we'll go into the fund balance discussion unless there's, Lydia, did you have another question?
Sort of, American Rescue Plan. We heard in our School of Government training that I believe this is the first time I'd heard the $10 million number, like anything up to $10 million can be treated as lost revenues. which gives us way more flexibility in spending the money. Well, that's good news, right? So do we have a plan yet for how we're going to spend this money? No.
We will develop that plan and bring it to you as part of this budget development and SOP proposal.
Okay. And also, Brooke, I want to thank you. Goes back to what we were talking about early, bragging on staff. And I haven't thanked you. I haven't thanked Jeff Batten last week. I haven't thanked Darren. You guys write really, really good staff memos. So thank you so much. Jeff Batten includes you and Darren. Thank you for writing such excellent staff memos.
Thank you.
That's all.
So we'll move into fund balance, and this is a continuing discussion developed at some of our council meetings, and I think those of you listening and here in the Assembly Hall today will be benefited by this presentation as well on what fund balance is and the different pockets it has and how that all works.
Perfect. So as we mentioned, Council discussed the fiscal year 2023 retreat follow-up items at your January 11th work session, and it was my understanding that you were interested in having a little more discussion about the rationale behind our 30% fund balance floor that's incorporated into our fund balance policy. So this discussion is just intended to cover the main purposes of fund balance and some key factors to consider and that we have considered when developing this fund balance policy. Perfect. So this slide shows some of the key purposes of fund balance. So we'll go ahead and start at the highest level of what is the reason for this and what do we need this for? First item here, provide cash flow when current revenues may not be available to fund current expenditures. As we talked about, property taxes are received in primarily August and December. And so we have to have sufficient cash reserves in place to cover those operating costs throughout the rest of the year when cash is low. Also, this allows us to avoid any short-term borrowing situations, which we don't want to get into. It also provides a rainy day fund for emergency situations, and an example of that are emergency weather. So in our case, we are susceptible to hurricanes and winter storms, things of that nature. These storms can require significant funding and out-of-pocket costs immediately upon the event that may not qualify for reimbursement. So just as an example, Hurricane Florence, if you recall, in 2018, we paid over $170,000 directly to contractors for storm debris removal, tipping fees, also on equipment repairs. We had an HVAC unit flood, road repairs for some road washing out, not to mention the labor costs. That is, the 170 does not include any labor costs that our in-house staff incurred to do a lot of storm debris removal and emergency response. So we didn't get reimbursed for these expenses for months, and in some cases, a year later or so. So we do have to have sufficient funds in place to cover situations like this in case those storms are not FEMA eligible. Another example is for economic downturns. So some of our revenue sources like sales tax and investment income is very susceptible to an economic downturns. They're sensitive, and they can drop very drastically in a very short period of time. So we want to make sure that we do have sufficient funds in place for situations like that. Fortunately, during the pandemic, it did not affect our revenue sources as drastically as economists originally projected. However, we do want to ensure that we have those funds available to cover things like payroll, utilities, just basic operating costs, so that we're able to continue to provide continuous service to the public, even if we receive significant revenue loss in a year. Our current fund balance policy minimum, which we'll discuss soon, has enabled us to continue providing those services within a fiscal year without making serious mid-year adjustments, even during the Great Recession. So there's not been a time, at least that I'm aware of, that we were not able to cover those budgetary obligations within a fiscal year. Now, subsequent budgets may have been adjusted to respond to the economic cycle, However, there has not been a situation in which we've had to temporarily lay off staff for a few months until revenues recovered or anything of that nature, which is something we, of course, want to avoid. The third area here is to save money for future capital expenditures. And the fourth item up here is to provide funds for strategic opportunities that arise. So it's not only from a negative lens, there are positive reasons to have it as well. For example, opportunities to purchase land or buildings, like we purchased land beside West Pinehurst Park and saw that as a strategic advantage, strategic opportunity. So those are the purposes that we've identified of fund balance. So for our fund balance policy, the village has maintained a lower fund balance in the general fund than some comparable communities. As you can see in the chart here, I know it's a little hard to see. The VOP, or Pinehurst, are the blue bars here. Those are our levels of fund balance as a percentage of actual expenditures. The red line is our fund balance floor. And you can see that some of these comparable communities that we often benchmark ourselves with. This is Cornelius, Southern Pines, and Davidson. And you can see they bounce around a little bit just like we do, but as a general statement, our fund balance levels have fallen below, or we maintain a lower fund balance typically. But I do want to mention, though, that fund balance needs of various communities, they differ widely. It just depends on a variety of factors, and we'll talk about some of those factors here in just a minute. The 30% of expenditure policy minimum has allowed us to maintain a healthy financial condition since it was adopted in 2003, and it has served us well.
Question?
Sure.
Am I reading that correctly, that the Davidson, North Carolina, at one point had 105% of fund balance?
Correct.
Thank you.
The next slide represents the village's fund balance policy. We do have a three-part policy, as you all know. The first part is measured at the beginning of the year, and so this is when we're preparing the annual budget. So right now, this is what we're using as we move into fiscal year 2023 budget preparation. Appropriated fund balance should result in an anticipated total fund balance at a minimum of 30% of budgeted expenditures. And where that 30% comes into play, it's approximately 3.5 months of expenditures. So at budget time, we do use this larger number because there are some portions of fund balance that are not spendable, as we've kind of talked through, as we've talked through the audit and the various categories of fund balance. Some of those things we just cannot spend. And it's very hard for us to estimate how much available fund balance we have at budget time because we don't know what contracts are going to be in place, those encumbrances that have been signed, those other categories of fund balance that we're required to report at fiscal year end. So that's why we're using this 30% item or number. I'd also like to put it into your household budget perspective, which I think helps. Think about it from your household. How many months do you want to have in your operating budget to cover expenditures in case of an emergency? And we've heard a lot of advisors say 3 to 6 months of expenditures for an emergency reserve. The same concept kind of applies for this village budget as well. It's prudent for us to have sufficient funds to address those various situations that we talked about previously. And we also do have to be able to respond to those unexpected emergencies and opportunities without interrupting our overall strategy and plan for the year. On parts 2 and 3, we've talked about this as well. This is measured at the end of the year, so this is at audit time with the audited financial statements. We are looking for unassigned fund balance of at least 15% of actual general fund expenditures. And we also have this new component that was added to make a concerted effort to save funds and set aside or commit fund balance for future capital needs.
Brooke, you identified on the part 2, it says unassigned fund balance must be maintained. Is that must be implemented by our policy, or is there some greater thing coming from the state of North Carolina?
Implemented by our policy. Great question. And where that 15 is coming into play too, that would leave right at 2 months of expenditures. This, if you're looking at 15%, 16% would be. But 2 months of expenditures that you would have available, funds available to use in the event of an emergency or opportunity. Okay. Here are just some general factors that we have considered along the way. A fund balance policy is recommended by the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association. We have one. The North Carolina Local Government Commission bare bottom minimum is a fund balance target of 8%, and that's only 1 month. But as I'll show on the next slide, they're not comfortable with 8% by any means. So this is just something they've identified, though, as an absolute minimum.
Just a question.
Sure.
The North Carolina Local Government Commission, that's an extension of the legislature, is
The
that correct?
state, a State Department.
So that 8% number, which I've seen before, comes out of a statute? Or it comes out of just this commission at one time or another in the past settled on 8%?
Sure, I would have to look to see if it's actually a statute. I think it is the authority that has been granted to the commission.
And the commission made
And the
this
commission
decision.
makes this
Yeah.
decision. I don't think I could reference an actual statute.
I'd be curious to see if that's
Sure.
when the commission adopted that 8%. Thanks.
And Brooke, is the 8% number that the state is using comparable to our 15%? Is it measured the same way? Or is it measured the way we measure our 30%? In other words, 8% of what?
Right. I think it's going to be 8% of your fund balance available, the available fund balance, which would be your committed, assigned, and unassigned all combined, because those are the things that we control as a unit. And we'll talk about that a little bit more on that next slide, because although they've said 8% as a bare bottom minimum, they're going to require folks to provide responses if they dip below a different threshold.
So, okay, so we don't want to go below 15% of unassigned.
Unassigned at year end.
That 15% is a different kind of measurement than the state's 8%, because they're lumping committed, assigned, and unassigned all together for their 8%. Right?
Right.
Right. And why, at the beginning of the year, do we look at total fund balance, which was committed, assigned, unassigned, and some other stuff?
Right. That's because at the beginning of the year, right now we're working on fiscal year 23, it is very hard to predict what our required by state statute calculation, what our encumbrances are going to be as of June 30th, 2023. And we're projecting more than a year out. So it's very hard to know what those different categories of fund balance are going to be.
Right.
So instead of trying to estimate what unassigned fund balance will be at that time, we use the 30% minimum to ensure that there's various categories in there we know are going to be non-spendable too, like inventory, things like that, that we can't spend. We use that larger number to give us a little bit of a buffer because we don't know what those ending numbers are going to be more than 12, 15 months down the road.
It's a more easily applied rule of thumb at budget time.
Exactly.
And do we get a lot of variation if there's committed, assigned, unassigned, and non-spendable? From year to year, are the percentages of those different categories that make up the whole, do they vary? Sometimes committed is 25%, sometimes it's 10%, sometimes it's 50%?
They can vary significantly depending on what's occurring. So if we have significant contracts that we've entered into at the end of the year to purchase a fire truck, that's always my example because it's the easiest, but we have entered into a contract, and so that causes our encumbrances to be a lot greater at the end of the year, as opposed to a year in which we just have some minor service contracts that roll over to the next
Building
year.
the community center.
Right, building the community center is a significant open contract.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, good questions. Other considerations are considering the actual individual government situation. Everybody has to consider the factors that are specific to their unit, which plays a role as well. So resort communities, for example, that may be susceptible to tourism and things of that nature, concentration of tax revenue in a single or a few large taxpayers, or industries also. So for example, think furniture. The furniture industry, if a lot of your taxpayers are manufacturers in that industry and something happens to that industry, then that may be another consideration. You want to have sufficient fund balance to address. The size of the unit, typically smaller governments have larger fund balances, fund balance percentages, and that's because the actual dollar amounts are a lot smaller than a larger unit like a Raleigh, for example, may not have to have the same percentage as a town of a smaller town. Also, our vulnerability to natural disasters. We talked about, we're susceptible to hurricanes, winter storms, things of that nature. Ones at the coast may have to consider hurricanes in even greater magnitude. The western part of the state would have to consider larger winter storms, things like that. And then reliance on state or federal funding. Fortunately, in our case, we don't have a lot of reliance. Fortunately, unfortunately, depends on how you look at it. But we don't have a large reliance on those funds, aside from Powell bill funding or things like that.
Brooke, what's a recent example of a natural disaster that affected us as Pinehurst?
That would be that Hurricane Florence, would be the most recent one that I can think of.
How many years ago was that?
2018. Mm-hmm. Yes.
We were talking about this a couple of weeks ago. Jeff, was it the ice storm?
Of 2000.
Yeah, around the 2000 timeframe was maybe the biggest one in contemporary times, yeah.
And what did we need to spend on that?
Sure. In that event, we spent over $170,000 in those contracted amounts. Total requested reimbursements were over $300,000 because we were able to capture some of the costs related to staffing because we had a lot of in-house staff. Now, some of that was already budgeted for, but a lot of that was overtime that would not have been paid and things like that.
We're talking about hurricanes and winter storms here. It's kind of hard to tell until something actually happens, but I think that the worst case for us is a direct hit by a tornado. That would be probably bigger for us than even a hurricane based on how far inland we are.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. That's right, because most of it related to hurricane is more pickup, cleanup after, more so than damage, exactly. There could be something that provides much greater damage. This last factor here, this is continued onto the next slide. This is what I was referencing a little bit or previewing a little bit. The Local Government Commission compares key financial performance indicators every year when we submit our audit. The first indicator that they look at is this fund balance available for appropriation. They compare our result to peer communities of a similar size that you'll see up there. And if a unit's fund balance percentage is lower in the lower quartile of their peer group, they will be asked to prepare a response to the LGC. The auditor is required to provide that and present that to the council or the board. And they do have to prepare a response to send back to the LGC.
So if we were to adjust ours to 25%, we would not need to send a letter, would we?
Unless we fell below that. If
we
actual fell
it.
below, we would.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. In this example. So for example, we're falling into the general fund expenditures above 10 million. The median of our peers is 46%. Yes. And the minimum threshold of that is 25%. So if our actual fell below that, and where the 25% equates to about 3 months of our annualized expenditures, 3 months of expenditures.
When's the last time we found ourselves in that situation?
We dipped pretty low when we built the community center because we paid for that in cash instead of issuing debt for that. And so we dipped. That was the closest in the recent history that I'm aware of.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. And I do want to mention too this, of course, we don't want to be in that position under any circumstances, but we especially don't want to be in this position to have to respond to the LGC if we have any desires in the near future to issue debt. The LGC is required to approve that debt. So these are things that they're monitoring to monitor the financial health of various units. So those are the things that they're looking for. And I just want to end with this quote here. I will read it. This is a recommended practice from the National Advisory Council on State and Local Budgeting. Government should maintain a prudent level of financial resources to protect against reducing service levels or raising taxes and fees because of temporary revenue shortfalls or unpredicted one-time expenditures. So that's what we've talked about. We want to make sure that we're able to maintain our service levels in the event that we have any unpredictable situations that arise. So that concludes my presentation of the fund balance policy, or our discussion of this policy. I hope that answers some of your questions, but I'm happy to answer any other questions you may have.
Thank you, Brooke. I think you anticipated very well, but are there other questions on this from council members? We'll be hearing even more about this as the budget process continues and the effect on fund balance going forward, which we get every year.
Am I right, Brooke, based on your past guidance, if we were to reduce our 30% figure to 25%, that would convert to about $1.2 million of a little more available funding for us to play with? I thought I got that number for you. I thought it was 10% was 2 point.
That'd be about right.
I think that's right. Yep.
I'm using round numbers. I'm not trying to hold you to.
You're close.
Be about right.
Okay.
Be about right.
That's how I want to be sure. Thank
In the
you.
ballpark. There you go. Great.
Brooke, thank you very much. Well,
Just a
See you
comment.
next month.
Having
Did it-
lived with this for now two plus years, these are the words that come to mind as I think about fund balance. People say your fund balance is too high, but I think consistency, predictability, stability, and flexibility. And especially to our taxpayers, when we maintain this level of fund balance, we can tell them what our tax rate's going to be in that 5-year plan, which provides stability, consistency, predictability to our taxpayers.
One thing I think we need to be careful about is whether or not we have a little more of the necessary amount of money, because taxpayers are wondering sometimes, what's going on with all that extra funding? You're running a great shop. You got no debt. We have the lowest tax rate of any community in the county of Moore. But what's with all that extra funds around? And so that's the other side of that coin.
Well, now, Pat, but as we've been hearing and as we discuss fund balance isn't just extra funds. There are pieces of it that are committed to stuff, and that's the education process we need to keep in mind.
But I think based on those 4 concepts that Brooke walked us through, okay, the rainy day fund, the capital expenditures that we're not sure what those are yet. We may have talked about them. We may all have a wish list, but they're that. There's something in the future that may or may not ever appear. And I think that's where taxpayers are getting concerned about, well, what are you thinking about with that money? And I think that's the big question out there. We shouldn't be penalized for having, run such a good government by the constant question of what are you doing with this extra money? Because my taxes went up last year slightly for the Village of Pinehurst, as we know, from 3.30 to 0.31. Small. Again, we have the lowest rate of any community in Moore County, but that little increase didn't go by unnoticed by a bunch of taxpayers. So anyway, I know we're going to discuss this more, and
Yes.
I look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Any other questions from council? Okay, Brooke, thank you very much. We'll move on to agenda item number 11. This is on the fees and charges schedule. Jeff, are you going to do that too, Brooke, or?
Got this one as well.
She will,
And
okay.
again, this is another topic that you've seen once before at the work session
Yes.
2 weeks ago.
Yes.
A lot of heavy focus on fees and charges associated with incorporation of the library's line of business to our operations. But I think that we're ready for you to act on these changes as well.
And in fact, I mean, the major question here is, did anything change in the last 2 weeks?
No, sir.
So we're here to affirm and vote on the items we talked about 2 weeks ago, and have been well presented and broken out from the library and the overall fees and schedules and the dates therein. So are there any questions from council on the presentation that Brooke made last time or can carry forward till today? Any questions about the data we had in the packet? If not, is there a motion then to adopt the resolution?
I'll move to approve Resolution 2201, amending the fees and charges schedule for the Village of Pinehurst.
That's a motion by Jane Hogaman. Is there a second?
I'll second.
That's a second by Jeff Morgan. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion of the new fees and services schedule is approved. Thank you very much again. Moving on to item number 12. Jeff?
Okay, we have kind of a mid-year update to the pay and classification plan that we'd like you to consider. Of course, you know, we recently had a retirement among our more senior staff. Our fleet department director retired 3 months ago.
November, end of November.
November, Randy Kuhn. And as we had been looking at this situation for quite a long time, but we thought it was probably not appropriate to try to take actions to change anything until that anticipated retirement. But as we look at how that department operates and the demands on that department, we recognize that it really doesn't need to be a department. It doesn't need to be a department head position. So what we're recommending is to downgrade that position in our pay and classification plan slightly to something that's more appropriate based on the job requirements.
Right, we are recommending that we modify this job from a director level to a supervisor level, which is very common across most towns in North Carolina. And it would drop four pay grades from grade 27 to grade 23, which is more in line with the functions of the job. And we have modified them slightly so that it would be more of assisting, making recommendations to the Assistant Village Manager of Operations, so directly to Jeff, and then would be in the shop a little more.
To Jeff Batten?
Correct, sorry.
Sorry, get my Jeffs
There's
confused.
a lot of Jeffs around
Yes,
here.
there are. Nothing wrong with that. Yeah, I get it.
Okay, any questions of Angie on this particular item? I think we all understand this very well, and let's move to adopt this. Is there a motion rather, to adopt 22-2, is it?
I'll move to approve Resolution 2203,
Right.
amending the policy on the administration of the position classification and pay plan for the Village of Pinehurst to change the position of Fleet Maintenance Director to Fleet Maintenance Supervisor and reduce the pay grade from grade 27 to grade 23, effective February 8, 2022.
Thank you. That's a motion by Jane Hogaman. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Pat Pizzella. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries. We've adopted that resolution.
Thank you.
Moving on to item number 13.
I just one comment I want to just compliment the very proposal to adjust the pay classification. Those do not come easily in government, from my own experience. And so obviously you pick the right time and all that, but that's the way people manage. But I think that's a wise decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Jeff, the next item,
Other
number
business.
13. Sorry?
Other business?
Yep, no, we're at item number 13, I believe. This is the DOT transition.
I apparently have an old copy of our,
I think we moved that, yeah, we moved that on. Take the blue in there.
let me get the updated one here, I'm sorry.
Highway too.
I'm sorry, thank you, yeah. This is actually my subject matter too. In conversations that we've had with members of our public over a very long period of time, been a lot of concern about particularly truck traffic coming down Midland and then, taking shortcuts through various parts of our kind of close in downtown area, maybe in particular Shaw Road. And we've been scratching our head about what could be done about this for a very long time. A couple months ago, we had what I thought was a very productive conversation with folks at NCDOT Division 8. This was myself and John and Pat. And we in the course of that conversation, we learned that you know, a lot of this truck traffic problem that we're seeing in an elevated sense around our community, and not only truck traffic, but also passenger cars, it's driven by the drive to GPS navigation. The thing that we really learned back in December was that, in fact, the major trucking companies all kind of use the same 2 or 3 tailored GPS navigation systems that cater to the trucking industry, because they know all the bridge classifications and the overpass heights and all the other things that truckers have to think about that general motorists don't have to. And we also learned that those trucking GPS routing entities base a lot of their algorithm information, or at least some portion of it, on the established state truck routes. And so we recognized in our conversation that maybe there's an opportunity to remove the section of NC2 between the traffic circle and Highway 5 from the state's commercial trucking route plan. And then we also learned that while they could do that, they really couldn't do it as long as that section of that highway remained designated NC2. So that's what all this resolution is about, is asking DOT to remove the NC2 designation from that road, that section of road. It'll still be a state-maintained road. It just won't carry the designation NC2. And then also ask them to follow up by dropping it as part of the state's commercial trucking route system. And we're hoping that that will have the positive impact, or some form of a positive impact in this whole, the big data GPS navigation system that is causing some of the problems that we have been seeing for quite some time. Pat?
Yeah, just theoretically then, that truck that comes up to the circle, rather than going down to, or Midland Road, as we'd like to call it, it would probably go straight.
211, yeah.
211.
Yeah.
Okay, or if it was going in the other direction, it would go down 15501, I suppose. Okay, I get it.
Yeah, and one of the other things that we learned from that conversation was DOT was receptive to this idea, particularly because Highway 211 runs almost parallel to Highway 2 in that stretch, and so it's little inconvenience to truckers to take 211 to go anywhere they want to go instead of that section of Highway 2. So, as I said, they're receptive. They kind of coached us in the development of this resolution. They asked us for the resolution so they can potentially act on it. So if you all do adopt this, we'll be sending this off to NCDOT Division 8 and then attaching an addendum request for them to, if they are successful, post no through truck signs on that section of road as well, to communicate the right message to those truckers as well.
Will we be in a position to do some metrics a year from now and seeing if it declined? How do we measure success as well?
We could, based on our, we could take a look at, that section of road, Shaw Road, that has been of great concern for quite some time. And, we have many recent traffic count studies that we've done on that section of road, and our traffic count studies categorize by class of vehicle or size of vehicle. So, yeah, we could see how,
I think that'd be helpful. I mean,
get an idea how successful we've been.
If we're successful, it's one of those small things where municipal government is actually being very responsive, and the state is cooperating with us. So I don't think there's much opposition to what's being proposed here. But
this was a very unique solution that sort of came out of the discussion Jeff said, and I think this is, I don't know that we have other areas, we might make a similar request in the future, but hopefully this will resolve some problems, and as Pat's pointing out, maybe we can find a way to kind of measure where we are now and where we are in a year, and hopefully we'll see the results, but hopefully we'll feel them and get them in a metrics as well. All right, are there any questions further on this resolution?
I have a question I have to ask, and is Jack Farrell, are you still back there?
Jeff Batten, are you here? Would you step
Yeah.
up, please?
Pine Wild's Abington Gate, our unmanned gate that is so unsafe because of large trucks that try to come in there and back out. Did you guys learn, and Jack Farrell had taught us if we have it marked as private, that would it didn't cut down on it. We've done everything. Did you learn anything in your discussions with DOT that might help Pine Wild? And you don't have to
With
give
that
me an answer
particular
now.
problem, that gate. and
Yeah,
that
it's
problem,
dangerous. The gate has to be there. And we've done everything we know to do to prevent big trucks from coming in there. It's nothing. Okay.
I think
like I
that's-
said, I had to ask.
That's more of a general GPS problem, which is very hard to solve.
Yeah.
As opposed to the trucker problem using state roads and in their system that they tend to use. But I'm
assuming
aware
these
that's
are
a very
trucks
difficult.
trying to make deliveries within Pinewell, but they're coming to the wrong gate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they pull up, they stop, they have to back out in at 211.
Yeah.
And I was just hoping maybe, because we've been fighting this battle for as long as you've been fighting your battle, so I was hoping maybe you got some new knowledge that would be useful to us. But if you wake up in the middle of the night and think of something, you or Jeff Batten, if you'll let us know, and Jack Farrell's nodding.
I don't know if Jeff has any further to
Yeah, I
say
don't
on
think
that,
it
but
applies to that situation.
we do have another meeting coming up with DOT in a few weeks. We could ask that at the time.
Be great.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right, council, any other questions on this matter? Item number 13, is there a motion, please?
I move to approve Resolution 22-02, requesting North Carolina Department of Transportation remove NC Highway 2 designation and commercial truck route designation from Midland Road, Palmetto Road, Azalea Road, and Cherokee Road between the Pinehurst Traffic Circle and NC Highway 5, thereby making the Pinehurst Traffic Circle the western terminus of North Carolina Highway 2.
Thank you, Lydia. That's a motion by Lydia Bosch. Is there a second?
Second.
That's a second by Patrick Pizzella. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries. We've adopted that resolution. Some interested parties are in the House.
All things.
That will bring us to item number 14, other business for this regular meeting. Does council member have any other business? Any staff members have any other business to bring before the meeting? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 15, comments from attendees. I do have a list of attendees who wish to speak. I would just remind you, please try to keep your comments to 3 minutes and try not to be redundant of comments that are very similar and maybe have been made by someone prior to yourself. The first person on the list is Jeff Heinz. Would you please come forward? And those of you who are speaking can use this podium right in the middle of the room there. Thank you. And if you just repeat your name and check your address, please, Mr. Heinz.
Good evening. My name is Jeff Heinz. I live at 225 Lake Forest Drive Southwest in Pinehurst. I think I speak for at least 4 people in the room that you can never have too many Jeffs.
And Mr. Heinz, may I ask you one other thing? If you can raise that microphone a little bit.
How's that?
That'll be great, and people at home and on the recording can hear you as well. Thank you very much. Go right ahead.
Ordinarily, people don't have trouble hearing me. My comments are directed to the small area plans undertaking, and I would observe, as I think many of us have, that growth is inevitable, and that in both the Pinehurst South and the Village Place areas, which are the 2 largest undeveloped areas of the village, the current patchwork of uses that we have is probably not what the residents there want, nor is it probably what the community at large wants. And so the undertaking of this planning process is laudable, and council and the staff ought to be commended for taking it up. And I know that it's been a lot of work. And I know that the administration and its consultant have tried to be responsive to concerns that have been expressed by the residents during the plan's evolution. But I think it's important to remember that the planning process here in Pinehurst is a little different. Ordinarily, planning processes like this are born of desperation. There has been a plant closure, there has been rust belt-like decay that compels a community to undertake a process to stave off its extinction. That's not the case here. We are a destination community. We are viable. We are in demand. And just because we're in demand doesn't mean we have to create supply. We can and should get what we want rather than being told to settle for what we have to take. I've participated in all of the public workshops. I've seen no residents who are eager to see this process brought to a hasty conclusion, but I've seen a consistent, broadly based support for the proposition that the plan should be created and refined to reflect what the residents want, with an emphasis on conformity with past efforts like the 2019 Long Range Plan. But that hasn't happened. There have been some concerns, like the one-time planned industrial district in Pinehurst South, that have been addressed, but others have not. The relocation of the village service depot, the implication of the plans on traffic, the prevalence of high-density multifamily, and others, and these have been brought up at every workshop that's been held so far. These questions deserve answers, and it's not enough to say, as the consultant did at last week's workshop, this is just one possible outcome, or this is only going to be built out in 50 years. Because the inference is, if you don't like it, don't worry. But people do worry, and blandishments like that do a disservice to the residents who take this process so seriously. They are the real stakeholders here. At the same time, I was surprised to hear at the workshop, and again this evening, how the village is apparently under pressure to get these plans done. That may be, but the pressure isn't coming from the residents that I can see. They've said over and over again that the village should take its time and get this right, because we only have one chance to get it right, really. Evidently, the pressure is coming from developers who are eager to undertake development in these areas, and that's great. They have property rights just like everybody else. But I suggest that with property rights come property responsibilities. And so, as they are stakeholders, so too the residents are stakeholders. And more importantly to me, there have been no evidence of this pressure in any of the public workshops. I've never seen anybody participate in any of those other than residents. So by whatever means this pressure is being exerted by those who are interested in accelerating development, the residents aren't hearing about it, and they're not having an opportunity to respond to it. But at the same time, it apparently is being successfully exerted because we're hearing about it from Mr. Burrick and others in the village. That concerns me because the process as it relates to the residents hasn't been as efficient. And some of these inefficiencies are due to the fact of the COVID pandemic, and I appreciate how difficult that has made the process. But nonetheless, many of the first two public workshops were on Zoom, which is cumbersome and difficult to decipher. And the workshop at the Fairbond, frankly, the presentation was hurried, the material was largely illegible, and the procedure for asking questions was awkward. It didn't work well. I suggest that the village hold a live, real-time, in-person dialogue with all the stakeholders, property owners, developers, residents, where there can be a give and take as to what concerns there are, and allow those concerns to be articulated and responded to. I've heard some pretty good ideas from residents about what these plans ought to look like. And I've heard, but I haven't seen them incorporated into the plans. I also believe that there are some pretty good answers to some of the questions that are being raised by the residents, but the residents aren't hearing them. And in my experience, respectfully, when one party to a dialogue is telling you that they aren't being heard, they aren't being heard. Without clear, transparent communication, this process is never going to generate the kind of support that it needs in order to succeed. And so I respectfully suggest that as we undertake this 120-day extension of the development moratorium, we try to incorporate into that an environment where these concerns can be addressed face-to-face and thrashed out. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Heinz. The next, would you hold your applause, please, and we'll move through these comments and not take the time away from those who've signed up. Next speaker is Bob Coates.
Good afternoon. My name is Bob Coates, and I reside at 21 Edinburgh Lane in Pinehurst. I have some comments on the small area plans. I'd like to start by reading from an article in the Pilot. Of the 10 residents who spoke during the public hearing, nearly all expressed concerns that the plan is development-driven. They said it does not mirror what the majority of residents have said they want in preserving the small-town charm of the village. They contend it opens the door for higher density development and encourages more multifamily housing. Oh, the date of that article was September 23rd, 2019. And the subject was the comprehensive plan. I'm reminded of the classic film Groundhog Day, as I feel like I'm living this episode over and over again. The long-range comprehensive plan was approved at the final village council meeting by what I refer to as the previous administration. This was in spite of the fact that many people thought that it should have been the decision of the incoming mayor and council rather than their just inheriting it. There should be no reticence by the current council to update this plan to better reflect the wishes of the citizens. At that same September 2019 meeting, the then head of the Planning and Zoning Board, in an effort to push through the plan's approval, stated, "This is not set in concrete. It is a living document." While my opening may seem a little negative, it is not directed at the current council, none of whom were in office when the comprehensive plan was approved. One of the major problems is the village's reliance on consultants to provide Pinehurst direction. Unfortunately, despite spending literally hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars on various studies, we must admit that we have often been misserved. The consultants who put together the 2019 comprehensive plan talked about the importance of an innovation hub in what is now deemed Pinehurst South. But the latest group of out-of-state consultants claim that this is not viable and have pushed for a market-driven approach. That is, what's hot at this point in time. This includes apartments and a lot of multifamily housing. Sure, it would probably sell well, but that is not what the citizens who live here want. Something in the Turnberry Woods style could be a good fit for Pinehurst South. My main message here is, rather than taking direction from consultants, please listen to the wishes of the citizens who elected you. They want to limit growth and improve traffic. Thank you.
Coates. The next speaker is Carol Coates.
Carol Coates, 21 Edinburgh Lane, Pinehurst. Regarding the small area plans, I'm confident that most everyone who was not fortunate enough to have been born here moved here because they liked the look of the village and that it was quiet and easy to get around. Unfortunately, some of those elements have been eroding of late. Less traffic, or at least no more traffic, is probably the highest priority of most residents. No one wants to sit through multiple light cycles on Highway 5 to get past Morganton Road. And while we don't have control over the neighboring towns and the traffic they send our way, that is no excuse for not doing as much as we can to help the situation. The small area plans show that Village Place and Pinehurst South combined would, at build-out, generate between 19,000 and 23,000 additional vehicle trips per day. Certainly a significant portion will end up on NC5. To put that in perspective, NC5 currently carries 20,000 trips each day in the Morganton Road area. The building moratorium for Village Place and Pinehurst South is a great first step, while final zoning is being worked out. Strong zoning is the key to limiting future growth. In an early landmark Supreme Court ruling, the Village of Euclid, Ohio, prevailed in their zoning ordinances designed to prevent the intrusion of industry from changing the character of their village. In broader terms, this set the precedent for upholding zoning which benefited the public welfare, and traffic impacts the public welfare. Well, it's been almost 100 years since the Euclid ruling, and the Supreme Court has not yet heard a case seeking to overturn this ruling. Alan Foneroff of Duke Law wrote an article, "The Relationship of Zoning to Traffic Generators." He said, by limiting the number of families that may dwell within a particular area, the number of vehicles needed to serve such an area is proportionately reduced. In Pinehurst, we've got the cart before the horse. We develop plans for a particular area and then ask, almost as an afterthought, how will these plans affect traffic? Instead, let's look at how to improve our traffic situation by establishing zoning that will generate less traffic and then require development to conform to that zoning. The bottom line, the impact of traffic is a legal and legitimate justification for zoning that limits growth. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Deb Wimberly.
Afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I live on Donald Ross Drive.
Thank you.
I have a minute and a half of remarks, but everything that I want to say, they have said more succinctly, much better sense. So I'm going to give my time over to the next smart person who's going to get up, but tell you I also do not want all of the growth. I didn't move here to live in Cary. Thank you very much, and especially appreciate your time and trouble to try to turn this village into a special place that it is, or keep it that way. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Kay Pearson.
Good evening and thank you. I'm Kay Pearson, 45 Brandon Trail, Pinehurst. Thank you, Mayor, councilors, and staff, and thank you for extending the moratorium tonight. Appreciate that. I'd like to address a couple concerns with regard to the small area plan, and I'm not going into any detail. Thankfully, I didn't write any detail because this gentleman covered a lot. Deb, thanks for, and Coates, please, thank you for addressing those issues. My concerns mainly focus on the process and the involvement or the lack of involvement with the citizens of this community, the main stakeholders. I appreciate the public workshops and last week's public presentation. However, according to one of the draft report's project goals and objectives, it said, and I quote, "It's to build support through a robust engagement process." I'm not sure efforts thus far has been robust in attendance or engagement. For myself, I'm barely halfway through the review of this draft document. I experienced great difficulty. I was unable to attend last week's forum at the barn. I experienced great difficulty hearing the presenter when reviewing the village's video, not only hearing it, but seeing it. So I got a third of the way through it and forget it. I respectfully ask the council to provide further opportunity for the citizens of this village to engage in this process more by having a second public forum, town hall, perhaps, style, right here at the Village Hall, where we've got light, we've got great acoustics, audiovisual equipment, and everybody can sit, as Mr. Hines suggested, talk. And in addition to a second public forum, I'm asking council to consider engaging citizens further by giving them a seat at the table going forward. And by that, I'm asking the council to consider, respectfully consider, appointing a citizens advisory committee who can specifically engage in this process going forward. However that happens can be ironed out. But I think that that would provide citizens to collaborate all their efforts. And we can't even begin to tell you the efforts that are running in the background every single day, and especially the last few weeks. I haven't engaged as much as I have in the past, but just to keep up with what these people, citizens, are doing, because we are so passionate about this process, but we are feeling left out. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. The next speaker is John Webster.
John Webster, 140 West Mackenzie. It's hard to add anything to, I think, what has already been said this evening. I just want to very quickly summarize the fact that, one, I have not liked at all the process that has been conducted so far. I think that residents feel totally left out of this. And I don't like the premises that started off with this whole small area plan. I don't know where we are getting the idea that we want to increase the density of this town. The villagers, the people who live here, do not want it. But yet this seems to be the emphasis again and again. We saw it in the comprehensive plan and we see it again. It's a real sense of deja vu, I think, as Bob Coates already said, as to what happened, what's happening now vis-a-vis the deja vu, the comprehensive plan. So,
Mr. Webster, could you speak up just a little bit or bring the microphone closer? Thank you.
Sure. And so I would just ask that this process engage the community seriously, and that we start off with the premises as what we want here before we start trying to decide, what little houses and what little buildings have to go here and there. So I'm not going to add anything more to that. The second thing I wanted to talk about was the financial statements and the general fund balance policy. And I think we're all very happy to see that the finances of Pinehurst are very, very healthy. We have, at the moment, a cash balance equal to the operating expenditure of this year. And I realize this goes up and down, but nevertheless, that's a pretty enviable position to be in. And more money is coming, from the American Rescue Plan. So this in the middle of a crisis. We have a fund to help us through crises, but we're in the middle of one and we seem to actually be benefiting from it. Anyway, good for us. Now, some time ago, I questioned the council as to why the VOP held general fund balances that exceeded its own agreed policy of 30 to 40%. And the answer, and as a second part to that was, and so please don't increase the tax rate every year as you've been doing so year after year. And the answer was to change the way the accounting was done so that we conform to the policy. And the tax rate continued going up. So my questions, once again, to the council, not that you're the same council I spoke to the last time on this, but how much cash is enough, number one? And do you or do you not agree that taxpayers' money is best held in their own pockets than in the pocket of government? And I feel like, that frog that gets boiled slowly, well, that's what the taxpayers of this town are like. Little by little, they go increasing our tax rate, and we just don't seem to realize, or some of us do, but a lot of people don't. And then on 2 or 3 items that came up in the presentation, the largest emergency item that people could recall was worth $170,000. This in the context of the millions and millions we're talking about here. And nobody could think of anything worse than that. And by the way, do we have insurance? I mean, if we have a tornado, Jeff, here, do we have insurance? Yeah. And a lot of these things, eventually we get reimbursed for. And for things like short-term cash flow issues, what we should have are bank lines. So, it takes us 4 months to get the money back from somewhere. Well, we have a bank line for that. We shouldn't be holding balances for this. I'm totally against the idea that the village, one of its sort of revenue items is the income they make on the cash balances we hold. I mean, I realize that we have to invest the cash that we have, but that we shouldn't have that as an objective. And by the way, holding $20 million at 0.01% in an inflation environment of 6% is crazy. I mean, you know, the taxpayers could be using this money and actually making something out of it. I wonder sometimes about, you know, Southern Pines, what their balances need to be. They actually own utilities. So I have a feeling their CapEx is much higher. So they probably have lots of funds with lots of CapEx money in it. So I'm not surprised that they would be higher. I think what I would ask, once again, really is, you know, let's consider what a reasonable rate is, and let's not have any more than that. And let's not just put, you know, use accounting to put money into other funds and saying, well, this is our war chest and we'll use it in the future. Let's really know what we're going to spend money on. And if things come up that we have to spend money on, then go to the taxpayers. If you really think that they're going to support you, that shouldn't be a problem then. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. The next speaker is Bruce Geddes.
Good evening, and thanks for having us here. My name is Bruce Geddes. I live at 232 Bowman in the Pinehurst ETJ. I'm speaking tonight about the SAPs, in particular traffic on Highway 5. I believe that Pinehurst South SAP is correct in that today we have 20,000 cars per day on NC5 in the study area, which is nearby Morganton Road. And I think it's fair to say that we probably have 20,000 cars or more per day on NC5 in the vicinity of Morganton Road. That's a service level of F. F is in fail. NC5 is a failed road in that area during peak travel times. So growth in the small area plans, as depicted, would add thousands more cars per day. We've heard numbers. I agree with those numbers. I agree with all the comments we've heard so far. But by my number crunching is something I know how to do. I've been looking at traffic information for a long time. I'm a stakeholder in the ETJ. I'm a stakeholder in the village of Pinehurst. We're looking at removing some traffic with the Western Connector. If we could wave a magic wand today and poof, there's a Western Connector, we'd probably remove something like 4,000 or 5,000 cars off of NC5. By my number crunching, the growth that's projected in these small area plans is going to put it all back plus more, maybe a lot more. So we're looking at 23, 24, 25,000 cars per day with the small area plans built out and the Western Connector built. We're still going in the wrong direction. We need to do everything we can to reduce growth, reduce density, or NC5 is going to stay a failed road. So I appreciate all the effort by the staff on the small area plans. I'm particularly interested in the form-based codes. I think that's a great idea. But I think it's market-driven. It's aspirational towards a market. It's not aspirational towards the residents and the traffic and growth concerns that we've heard about tonight. So I would ask you to please reconsider the aspirations of these plans and focus more on purchasing and preservation of land, vacant land in these small areas. Let's go the other way. Let's preserve and protect what we've got now and not make NC5 any worse than it is today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Geddes. The next speaker is Jack Farrell.
Thank you. Jack Farrell, 21 Gray Abbey. I'm going to take a slightly different approach on this. I 100% agree with the comments from the previous speakers. However, being kind of an implementation guy, I sat down this afternoon and said, how can I get this thing over the hump? How can we get to end the job on this baby? And so I looked at the plans, and I've been reading them for a week or so. I'm not terribly impressed with them, but they are what they are, and we are going to grow to some extent in each one of these areas. And the question is, how do we do it appropriately? I strongly believe that form-based codes can help us considerably to get there. So I have, relative to the plans you have in front of you, the documented plans, I have some suggestions for each of those, both the south and the Village Place. For me, that would take me over the hump, and we could put the plans aside and get to the real work, which is developing the form-based codes and the appropriate zoning changes. So here it goes. For Pinehurst South, I have 6 items that would take me over the hump here, and I can give these to you later if you'd like, or just email it to you. Number 1, remove all residential from the parcels east of Route 5, as this is totally inconsistent with the comp plan, and also totally against the expectations of the community for this area. Number 2, eliminate Trotter Hills parcel from further consideration as it essentially a done deal professional park. And I don't think it's worth spending any more time on it. Number 3, develop 2 form-based codes for this area, at a minimum 2. One for the residential area west of Route 5, excluding Trotter Hills and parcels fronting on Route 5. And a second for all the parcels east of Route 5, potentially excluding the currently zoned Cottages parcel and the Arnett Street parcels. The form-based codes must be clear on what type of building will be permitted in these areas and exclude and not allow those building types that are not appropriate with the intent and plan for each section of the focus areas. Read that, no building types of multifamily or residential east of Route 5. Eliminate the move of an industrial facility, the Village Pinehurst service yards and maintenance facilities from this area as being totally inconsistent with the intent and character of this zone. Remove the fiscal analysis from this document that is not only flawed, but implies the village is making land use decisions based on how much money it can extract rather than what is best for the community. And lastly, for Pinehurst South, as a parallel activity, resolve any ownership issues relative to Olivia Street and come to an agreement with the railroad and NCDOT on which street and crossing, either Annette or Olivia, will be the crossing at this end of the area, and make the necessary acquisitions and improvements on this selected crossing to support the parcels. Relative to Village Place, I have only 4 items I need here, because I think actually it's not half bad, to tell you the truth, looking under the covers. Number 1, remove the commercial infill indicated on the residential lots west of Magnolia that were never part of the focus area in the comp plan. Placing commercial development in the backyards of the residential area on Cadell is totally inappropriate, and the consultants had no authority to expand this area. Number 2, develop at least 2 sets of form-based codes for the focus areas. There's a need for a transect, that is a transition between the less intensive potential development along Rattlesnake and the more intense potential development in the core area potentially. That is the area generally used by the Village of Pinehurst Service Area Facility. And another item would be an extension of Kelly Road to Magnolia should be a pedestrian walkway only to connect this area with the Village Hall, the Pergola Gardens, and the Arboretum, and the potential outdoor amphitheater, which I fully support. And lastly, remove the financial analysis from this section also, as this not only flawed, but implies the village is making land use decisions based on how much money it can extract rather than is best for the community. Those items would take me, we can get this document, put it on the shelf, and then get to the real work. That's where I think. The other most important thing is I think the process discussion was important that people suggested, and maybe if we spend a little more time engaging the citizens going forward, I think we can be successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farrell. The next speaker is Debbie Layler.
I just wanted to ask Mr. Farrell if he could email those maybe to everyone
say
tomorrow.
That, yeah. I was going to say that, and any of those of you who have spoken and have notes and would like to forward them on to the council, if you have not already done so, you're certainly welcome to do that. And yes, Mr. Farrell can provide that too. Debbie Layler, please.
Debbie Layler, again, thank you again for letting me take the podium, 80 Azalea Road.
Come to the microphone, please. Thank you.
Azalea Road, thank you for letting me speak again. It's really hard to know anything new to come up with after everybody else has spoken so eloquently. I had planned to start out and congratulate Jeff and Brooke on the financial well-being of the village. It's really remarkable. And unfortunately, I suspect in large part, it may be due to the village's reliance on the land use fiscal analysis study that was done back in 2017, which has provided the financial an analytical model which has underpinned a lot of the development in the village since 2017, and to which Mr. Farrell just alluded. Incorporating a financial analysis, especially one that leads you to support higher density residential development, is just not a good idea. Other speakers have mentioned that they think these plans are market-driven. Could be, probably, but they are also, that aspect of it, that push towards high residential development, is also coming from the village's own reports. So in terms of the plan I would like to address, which is Village Place, I can say only that when I looked at the renderings, I did not see a charming New England village. I think, as somebody else alluded to, Pinehurst is at a moment, I said this to you several weeks ago, we are at a crossroads. The council has the ability at this point, given the financial well-being that we are in, to make a decision whether to try to renovate, improve, rehabilitate the old town charm and look, which I think has been degrading for the past 10 years. We have the USGA coming. This is a moment to seize, and there's money in the bank, and come up with a plan for Village Place that extends that charm and the ambiance and the atmosphere of the existing Old Town downtown area. This plan just doesn't do it. I'm really sorry. A lot of work, great effort, but it just doesn't look like Pinehurst. And I know it's aspirational, but it's frightening in what it implies. So thank you for letting me speak my piece again. And look forward to hearing how you decide to progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who has not spoken who wishes to do so on this issue, on any issue that you wish to bring to the council? Yes, ma'am. Would you step to the microphone and identify yourself, please?
Jean Castanella, and I live on 25 Lake Hills Road. I want to say I'm amazed. I came here feeling kind of down in the dumps because I'm part of a group that are trying to encourage the council to deal with a problem that's going to add many more vehicles and a destruction of residential areas, and that's short-term rentals. We are not studying how to close off the ability for residents of this area to rent their home out. But what we would like is guidance, ordinances, and the things that we need to do to protect this incredible place that we all came to live in. And as I've lived here 20 years, I'm seeing some things happening that are a little bit disturbing. And when you sit around and you take a look at what could happen to the southern end, which is right in our backyard, it's pretty frightening to know that we can hardly get out of Lake Hills Road on 5 now. And what will it be like when the resorts up the ante and push short-term rentals, and all of the real estate people here are working very hard to do something that I think you all need to hear about and think about. We have a legislature who is trying very hard to take away the rights of this council to run their own communities. And they've had 2 bills out now to allow the growth of short-term rentals and to take away the ability of the council and our fine zoning and planning group. They want to take the rights away from us and tell us that we're going to have short-term rentals, whether we want them or not, in residential areas and change Pinehurst even more than it is right now. So I'm grateful to all of you who stood here tonight to let the council know that we're not happy with the direction that Pinehurst is going in. We didn't come here to live in a metropolis filled with multi-developments. We came here for peace, to retire, and I know the population is changing, and I respect that. But you now have children living here, and we need to think about the safety and welfare of those young children to be able to play in their yards, to be able to live a great life, and not have to worry about who may be having a rousing party next door with 12 or 15 cars down the road, or trying to park in my yard or across the street, using drugs, drinking, and creating havoc in a neighborhood. So we all need to work together because these issues are intertwined, and I hope you will come together and, quite frankly, put a little pressure on those who make the decisions. We're paying for it. Thank you.
Thank you. That closes the public comment period, which we very much appreciate the input we've had tonight. Is there another person? Council agree to take another speaker? Is that okay? Please, ma'am, step forward.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Debbie Putz. I am a property manager and a licensed broker. I've worked in the village for the last 15 years for Village of Pinehurst Rentals. We're a full-service property management firm. All of our vendors are local. We support our community. We have a 24-hour live answering service. They are there to handle lockouts, any issues whatsoever that occur. If the answering service cannot handle the problems, the call comes to me. There is a big difference between a full-time, full-service property manager on site versus VRBO and Airbnb. That needs to be recognized as a complete different entity. We speak to our clients a minimum of 2 to 3 times before reservations are taken. We know what they're here for. We know how many people are staying. Besides all the contracts that they sign that are approved by the North Carolina Real Estate Board, we've implemented 3 additional pages of rules and regulations that outline a lot of the rules that follow your guidelines, noise regulations, bagging trash, all of the things, because we want to be an advocate to the rules that you have in place for us. This should not be an adversarial situation. We can live cohesively together. Our firm has been in the same building for over 40 years. We started with very few properties, and we slowly and have respectfully added to our inventory. We do long-term rentals as well as short-term rentals. We handle all of our, the goal is when you drive by one of our properties, you should not know that it's a rental because they have to follow the same guidelines as a homeowner. We have been, I think, very good wards of the properties that our owners hire us individually for, but the big difference is we're here all of the time. I understand concerns of citizens of Pinehurst. I live here. I get it. But please don't lump us all together. It's not correct. Airbnb and VRBO just came on board maybe 5 years ago. I've been here 16 years. Our firm has been doing property management for 40 years. I just ask that we be open-minded, and when regulations and rules are trying to be implemented, let's separate the men from the boys here, because we're really not all the same. I thank you very much for your time.
Before you leave, ma'am, just to make sure I have it right, is it Putz, P-U-T-Z?
That is correct, sir.
And what is the your home address?
It's 1 Sand Hills Place.
This is your personal address? Or
Yes, that's correct.
1 Sand Hills Place, and you're with Sand Hills Rentals?
I'm Village of Pinehurst Rentals.
Village of Pinehurst Rentals.
That
Thank
is
you very
correct.
much.
You're welcome.
Okay. I believe that does, oh, please come forward.
Hello, my name is Brenda Exoteris. I'm at 180 Idlewild Road, Pinehurst. Thank you very much, Council, for putting on the agenda the topic of short-term rentals. I've been very much pleased working with Darren Burrich throughout this past 2 weeks. I just want to let you know that I started gathering a list of short-term rentals, which is a very laborious task in which to complete. I did go to the Village of Pinehurst, looking at their website to obtain properties. I've looked at Sandhills Rentals, who have listed their advertisement of properties, and I'm starting to navigate my way through VRBO, establishing links. I made contact with the Convention and Tourist Bureau, and I spoke with Phil Wirtz today, who is also a very nice gentleman and very informative. He shared with me, as well as with Darren Burrich, a report that he receives from the Airbnb. I've not started to digest that report as yet. It has a lot of different tabs, but this report and the data is very discerning and somewhat uncomfortable to me because it really illustrates the growth of short-term rentals within our community. This does not include VRBO. It might not include Sandhills. It might not code in Village of Pinehurst properties. But they listed 311 properties with Airbnb. In 2020, there was 181. Right now, 2021, there's 311. That is 71% growth. When you look at the studios that they listed, that there were 9 studio apartments. There currently is still 9 studio apartments. On my list that I'm compiling, when you look at some of the occupancy of those, they're cramming individuals into these facilities. That 1 studio bedroom apartment might be advertised having an occupancy of 6 or more. Those beds, they're sleeping, they're fire hazards. When you look at the 1 bedroom, there was 46, there are now 65. 2 bedrooms, 97. We now have 129. 3 bedrooms, 65 in 2020, 121. These are our homes, these are our neighborhoods. In 4-bedroom plus, there was 79. There are now 132. Those are alarming, and that is one source, that is Airbnb. That's not what else is going out there. He said to me today, we're growing at one of the most highest in the country, not the county, the country, and perhaps in the world. Those were his words, not mine. Pinehurst rates top in the country, one of the true hot spots in the U.S. Total revenue in December amounted to $1.3 million in $39,000 in occupancy tax. What do your hoteliers in our community feel about that? I'm not against short-term rentals. I'm not opposed with them. I agree with the woman that spoke. We all need to come together. We need to come together, work on a solution, work on a compromise, work on something that we all can live with. We love the Village of Pinehurst. This is our home. This is our community. We want to live here, retire here, raise our children here. But this board, this council must regulate and put some parameters in place to enforce and give us some zoning and some ordinances to protect us, because another thing that was said, or will become the wild, wild west.
Ma'am,
Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm running a little behind in my administrative duties here tonight. Could you slowly, and I apologize for not hearing it correctly the first time, could you slowly give me your name and I'll make
Brenda
Yeah.
Exoteris.
I got it. I thought that was you, Brenda, but I wasn't sure. Thank you very much
You're
for the
welcome.
for
Thank
the
you
input
very
you've
much.
provided in the past, too. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Are there other persons? Seeing none, that will bring us to our next agenda item on the regular meeting, which is a motion to adjourn the regular meeting and move into a work session. Is there such motion from the council?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
That's a motion by Patrick Pizzella, a second by Jeff Morgan. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None. The motion carries. We'll move in a few minutes to a work session. During that work session, as you know, we'll have active council discussion of short-term rentals on the one hand and the small area plans on the other. Thank you very much. We'll rejoin here in about 10 minutes, 7:05. I am calling to order the work session for February 8th, 2022 of the Pinehurst Village Council. We have two